Look at Cuba from above, and the politics starts to shrink. One island sits across the mouth of the Gulf of Mexico. To the north, Florida. To the west, Yucatan. Two narrow gates, one island between them. That is the map before the ideology. In 1898, the United States went to war over Cuba. The official reason was liberation. Spain was cruel. Cuba deserved freedom. The war was wrapped in democracy and moral obligation. It was also very fast, 10 weeks. The Spanish fleet destroyed. Cuba effectively under American control. That speed suggests something deeper than ideology. Cuba sits 90 miles from the Florida coast. It stretches nearly 700 miles east to west, directly across the entrance to the Gulf of Mexico. To the west, the Yucatan Channel runs between Cuba and Mexico. To the north, the Florida Straits press Cuba against Florida. Two narrow gates, one island sitting between them. And behind those gates sits the most economically important enclosed sea in the Western Hemisphere. The United States did not go to war in 1898 because it only cared about Spanish colonialism. It went to war because it finally understood what Cuba was. Cuba is the gate. If you want to understand how geography sets the terms before politics arrives, this channel is built for exactly that. Stay with this. The Gulf of Mexico is not usually described as a strategic prize. It should be. It is nearly landlocked, roughly 1,000 miles across at its widest. The United States borders it to the north and east. Mexico closes it from the west and south. Cuba and the Caribbean narrow its southern rim. There are two meaningful exits: the Florida Straits, the passage between Florida and Cuba's northern coast. At its narrowest, it is about 90 miles wide, and the Yucatan Channel, the passage between Cuba's western tip and Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, about 150 miles across. That is it. Two gates for the entire Gulf. Everything entering the Gulf passes through one of those passages. Everything leaving passes through one of those passages. Oil tankers, container ships, grain carriers, military vessels. The surface traffic of an enclosed sea moves through two narrow maritime doors. This is not a body of water that can be bypassed. It cannot be rerouted like a highway. If you control access to the Florida Straits and the Yucatan Channel, you control what enters and leaves the Gulf of Mexico, and Cuba's 700 miles sit between them, not near one gate, between both. From Cuba's western end, the Yucatan Channel is exposed. From Cuba's northern coast, Florida sits 90 miles away. From Cuba's position in the system, a hostile force can threaten the enclosed sea behind it. No other island in the Western Hemisphere has this relationship to American maritime power. This is the physical fact behind 5 centuries of strategic pressure. The Gulf matters for 3 reasons. The first is oil. The Gulf of Mexico is one of the world's major offshore hydrocarbon basins. The United States extracts enormous volumes of oil and gas from Gulf waters. Offshore platforms rise from the water. Refineries line the coast. Energy terminals connect the sea to the continent. This is not marginal infrastructure. It is one layer of America's energy foundation. The second is industry. The Texas-Louisiana coast holds the densest petrochemical corridor in the United States. Plastics, fertilizers, industrial gases. The feedstocks move far beyond the Gulf itself. They enter manufacturing, agriculture, packaging, construction, and defense supply chains. Much of this industrial system depends on Gulf hydrocarbons, Gulf ports, and Gulf logistics. The third is agriculture. The Mississippi River drains roughly 40% of the continental United States. Its watershed reaches into the Corn Belt. It reaches the wheat plains. It reaches the soybean fields of the American interior. Every major tributary flows south. All of it reaches the Gulf. At the mouth of the river, grain elevators and bulk terminals load American food onto deep draft vessels. Soybeans, corn, wheat. America's food exports to the world exit through the Gulf. So here is what the Gulf actually is. It is the drainage outlet of the American agricultural empire. It is a production basin for American energy. It is the industrial backbone of the American chemical system. All of it enclosed, all of it accessible through two narrow passages. And a hostile force with naval, air, missile or surveillance assets on Cuba can threaten both. Not sequentially, simultaneously. It can threaten American shipping. It can threaten energy exports. It can threaten food exports at the same time. This is not a theoretical vulnerability. It is the exact geometry of American economic exposure. The pattern is not new, and it is not ideological. In 1898, the United States recognized something with sudden clarity. European power on Cuba was incompatible with American security. Spain's decline created the opportunity. Liberation rhetoric made it publicly acceptable, but geography made it necessary. Within 3 years, the Platt Amendment gave the United States the right to intervene in Cuban affairs. It also helped secure Guantanamo Bay as a permanent naval station. Both were framed as protections for Cuban sovereignty. They were geographic locks. The United States was not only protecting Cuba from Spain, it was protecting the Gulf Gate from any European successor that might inherit Spanish Cuba. The second signal came 60 years later. In October 1962, American reconnaissance aircraft photographed Soviet missile sites under construction on Cuban soil. The public framing was nuclear. Soviet missiles 90 miles from Florida, a direct threat to American cities. The crisis was presented as ideological confrontation, communism pressing against the American homeland. It was also geography. Soviet missiles on Cuba did not merely threaten Florida. They threatened the Gulf. Missiles based on Cuba could strike offshore platforms, coastal refineries, port infrastructure, and naval facilities. They could threaten the Florida Straits. They could pressure any naval force trying to move through either gate. The Soviet Union was not making a nuclear chess move. It was trying to put a veto on the Gulf of Mexico. The Kennedy administration understood this, even if it did not describe it that way. The demand was absolute. Remove the missiles. No acceptance of foreign military power on the island, not because of ideology, because of the gate. The third signal is more recent. Reports of Chinese signals intelligence facilities in Cuba have circulated with increasing credibility since 2023. The precise details remain disputed. The geometry is not. China does not need missiles on Cuba to understand the island's value. A surveillance position on Cuba can monitor Gulf shipping, naval communications, energy logistics, and export movement. It can watch the economic nervous system of the American hemisphere. Cuba, in Chinese access, is not just a Caribbean partner. It is a listening post over the Gulf Gate. 3 different powers, 3 different eras, 3 different justifications, the same island, every time. If this changed how you read the map, subscribe. Earth and Empire covers what the ground underneath power actually looks like. The Monroe Doctrine is usually read as a political statement, a declaration of hemispheric ambition, an assertion of American power dressed in anti-colonial language. Read it as geography. The doctrine's core claim was simple. No European power should extend political control in the Western Hemisphere. It was announced in 1823 when the United States had no true blue water navy. The ambition was larger than the capability. But the underlying logic was not only ambition, it was Cuba. American strategists had already recognized the shape of the problem. An independent hemisphere was only safe if the Gulf's gates stayed outside hostile control. Europe was the threat. Cuba was the gate. The doctrine was the policy. The Spanish-American War executed it militarily. The missile crisis executed it nuclearly. The current China-Cuba relationship is executing it digitally. The surface framing changes every generation. Liberation, anti-communism, strategic competition, the mechanism never changes. Cuba is a geographic fact. The Gulf is a geographic fact. Two narrow gates connect a vital enclosed sea to the wider ocean. These facts do not respond to ideology. They do not respond to political change in Havana. They do not respond to American election cycles. They do not respond to diplomatic moods. It is not about Castro. It was never about Castro. It is about where the island sits. The logic that drove a 10-week war in 1898 is the same logic that drove a 13-day nuclear standoff in 1962. It will be the same logic driving whatever comes next. Ideology is the explanation a geography uses when it cannot speak directly. Spain said it was civilization. The United States said it was liberation. The Soviet Union said it was solidarity. China says it is diplomacy. The island has heard every version. And none of those framings changed the physical fact. Cuba is 90 miles from the American coast. It sits between the only two gates of the Gulf. The Gulf drains the agricultural empire. It feeds the energy system. It carries the exports of the American interior to the world. An enemy on Cuba is an enemy at the gate. This has been true for 500 years. It will be true for the next 500. History does not keep returning to the same island because of the island's ideology. It keeps returning because of the island's geometry. The most durable form of power is not ideological, it is geographic, and it does not change.